So I'll share the lecture here in a minute, but yeah, did anybody get a chance to read the lecture? Anybody want to just offer a question or a general sense or a comment on it at this point?
I had the opportunity to listen to it this afternoon. I absorb better when I read, but if I run out of time, I listen to it while I walk. And I have a big problem with my will. So looking forward to gaining some insight and calming the monster. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a really a good lecture, right? On a couple of levels. So hopefully it'll be helpful.
You
Anybody
know,
else?
it's been a while since I've actually read this lecture, and I'm reading them sequentially, and it takes me a long time to absorb them. And I'm not any further than like 100 right now, but it feels like when I read this lecture the first time, I was in a very different place than I am now. I have a little bit more insight, so it feels so much more refreshing to listen to it now, and I understand it a little bit better.
Yeah,
So yeah,
good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Dick. Welcome home. Look at you. You're back home.
I'm back home, regrettably, because
Yeah.
Denver's got incredible pollution and smoke. But other than that,
Uh, Not a good place for your lungs, probably, huh?
no, no, it's not. But I'm glad to be here with all of you.
Yeah, welcome back. So we were just kind of doing a little check-in around the lecture. If anybody wanted to, make a comment or, if they've read it and that kind of thing before we start reading it.
I read the lecture well, I tried to this morning before I had to go take my mom to the doctor.
Mm.
And it was, I don't know, I think my concentration was just not there. But,
Mm.
and then the lecture just kind of felt like it was stinging me, so to speak,
Mm.
because, I was like, well, what about, this unselfish versus selfish, but what about when you feel obligated and you don't really feel committed to your obligation, that kind of thing. That's what was going on with me in terms of the care that I'm, my mom, the care that I'm obligated to give at this
Right.
moment in my life, which I don't know. It's not coming, certainly not coming from an unselfish place. I don't I don't say to myself, oh boy, I get to go take my mom to the doctor and spend 3 hours listening to her repeat herself. You know,
Yeah, yeah. No,
uh, it's hard.
yeah, absolutely.
It's damn hard.
Absolutely. And I don't think you could do it unless there was your own higher self inner willingness, right? Because to kind of use your outer will to force yourself through all of that, like at least my child would be totally rebellious, right? Or want to, or then, just do it but feel so pissed off and negative it would be, like ruinous for me and everybody else around me,
It is
right?
hard. It's hard.
Yeah. No, maybe this can, and I hear you, like about sometimes it feels like, it's like a whip or stinging or something, but it's like I had to work with that a lot myself because everything was, and that didn't feel right. So I began to realize that that was also my own thing, right? And that I could work with the lectures, and where I felt that, explore that just because that was healing to do, right? And there was some distortion in, taking it on like somebody was scolding or punishing, or my own guilt was, you know, whipping me, right? So it's good. It's like that's when the guide triggers something in us, and we can give ourselves a session, because that can is kind of part of what he's trying to help it lead us out of, right? That we don't have to um, use guilt and conflict, or all of that, to choose. And it's okay to be selfish sometimes, and it's okay to have your feelings, of this isn't what I would choose if I had another option, in a way, right? So it's not about lying about that, but I think once we can acknowledge that truth, then we can also see where our yes is coming from, right? And affirm that and align with that, and that it will help carry us through the things that are the most difficult, but that we know is ours to do, right?
Well, if it's true that we made some kind of an agreement with these other souls in the spirit world before we came, then, part of me has to kind of see it through and find the lesson, It's, I don't know. I know a lot of people are like, oh, they just disown parts of their family. It's like, I can walk away from that person or this person or whatever. But if it's true that we make this agreement, then we do need to see it through for whatever it's really worth, don't you think?
I think that is certainly, one truth, one, motivation from, the higher, inner will in some ways, right? So that, I would say, is sort of the part of your inner will that is choosing this, right? And the reason why, and it's a selfish reason, as the guide was saying, and ultimately, like at the end of the day, the unselfish is selfish, but also,
Yeah.
and still hard, right? But you probably would not respect yourself if you didn't try, or whatever. It's so, and like you said, there's a deeper reason that you sense is there. So
Yeah, for sure.
so let me go ahead and share the lecture. Anybody else feel like they want to chime in here on that?
Well, really quick, what came up while I was reading something, at least the first few pages, was my background is full of guilt, shame, and shoulds, and what's wrong with you if you don't do it. All my, from the family Catholic upbringing was pretty intense. So it's very difficult still for me to separate myself from those programs and overcome and it sounds similar to what Frank's saying. It's a trying to get past or see through those programs to see what's on the other side, and it's a challenge for sure, because on the surface it doesn't make any sense. I don't want to help anybody, and I've already done too much of that in my life, and yada yada yada. So it's an interesting challenge. Also, Darlie, could you turn your volume up a wee bit? I don't know if that's possible.
Is this any better?
Yeah.
Yep, thanks.
Okay, good. Thanks for alerting me. So great. Yeah, and I mean, it's a deep lecture, and it's not. So I think it's definitely in this territory that everybody's speaking to. So hopefully, let's just invoke and invite the wisdom of the guide to illuminate this more deeply in each of us, right? How it arises, and it's a real key, I think, in many ways. So hopefully we can follow this a bit. So this was a lecture called Outer Will and Inner Will, and then dash misconception about selfishness. So kind of some of the lectures seem to be sort of a blending of several topics, and in this case he's working with these. And this was delivered in April 29, 1960. Greetings, I bring you blessings, my dearest friends. Blessed is this hour. Tonight we will discuss willpower. One often hears that with the proper application of willpower, practically anything can be achieved. Yet you all have had the experience that you wish very much for something, but in vain. This is due not only to unconscious contrary will currents that divide your will, but also to something that is vastly overlooked. It is the fact that two different kinds of will exist, the inner will and the outer will. This is very important for you to understand. So he says the outer will is, our sort of active, like sort of we know we can, raise our arm, and so we raise our arm, it's kind of this will that we're used to trying to apply. But in other lectures, he talks about how like that kind of will does not really, the emotions don't respond to it. We can't make ourselves love somebody. We can't make ourselves feel happy, right? So, there's a kind of limitation in this outer will. And because it's sort of limited, then it's like it's never very, it's tense and impatient and cramped and, sort of not sure of itself. And then the inner will is this whole other domain that we often don't even recognize is there, that's calm and relaxed and unhurried. And he says, again, the outer will is anxious and doubtful, while the inner will is a certain knowing, neither anxiety nor doubt. So, this is kind of a rarefied thing. I don't know if any of you have ever had this, the way he's describing it now, this experience of inner will. Is there any examples that come to mind for anybody? I think in some ways, it's part of like our higher self. It's always kind of there in some sense, and there's some part of our inner will is guiding our lives, and even when we're not sure what we're doing, right, and when we look back at all of the things that we've been through, what is it that has brought us this far, right? What's kept us going? So I think there is sort of a deeper sense of this part, but we may not have a lot of experience with sort of relaxed, certain knowing within us. And yet, the things that, it may have manifested in your life, I think of, all of the things that kind of, and this is part of sort of this manifestation stuff, right? And it's not around just, you just believe it and then it'll happen. But there's, all of these factors that are involved in this idea that, we have to align the inner will with what we feel is correct, right? So like, again, later on in the lecture, he talks about selfishness, right? So if we think what our outer will wants is selfish, we may not be able to really manifest that, because a certain guilt or conscience or something like that is involved, right? So we have to work with all of this. And so let me go back to the lecture for a minute and, just see if in this moment you can sort of tune in. Is there any part of you that you could say has a sense of grounded, centered certainty? Maybe follow your breath for a minute into your heart. Feel that deep heart a little bit, or, ground into the root chakra, into the earth. And of course, the earth is going through a lot of shaking, and there's really not a lot of certainty or, clarity right now. So maybe there's a kind of groundless ground that we can connect with. And this is, deep in this larger self of the higher self, of the God spark within us. But it's good to try to just know it's there and to access it, or to just kind of reach for it every once in a while. See what you have a sense of it as inside of you. So then he goes on and he says, impatience arises when one doubts the desired result. So upon examination, we find that impatience cannot exist where there is certainty. But when one is uncertain about the results, one cannot afford to wait with calmness. And so, hence impatience, doubt, and anxiety are closely linked. And I mean, I always have to laugh at this in some ways, because like if I knew what I wanted was going to happen, or everything was certain, or then I could relax and be patient and not push the river, right? And impatience is one of my big faults. I'm an Aries, and it's like I want to be there already, and so there's a way that I keep feeling the truth of what he's saying here. Like I could relax and allow, if I had faith in the certainty of the outcome, right? And of course, as we've been working with dying into life and other things like that, it's like the only thing we can really be certain of is, at any given moment we may have to die in some way or another, right? So we also have this fundamental, reality of our, emotional and our physical vulnerability, right? Our softness and how vast and scary sometimes life can be, or difficult, just in even in our comfort materially, like Frank says, there's many things that we have to face and go through that are not so easy.
Arlene,
Uh-huh.
is it fair to say, like I've read or heard in other lectures, that it's that if one holds the trust that the universe has our backs, or has the positive ultimate best interest, is that a fair way to hold this concept, or hold my energy when all these doubts and fears come up, or is that kind of avoiding feeling?
No, well, I think you can do both, right? Part of what we want to do is we want to go into the doubts and fears, but we want to have them held, and we want to feel the ground underneath, right? Because otherwise we're just re-traumatizing, right? And if we don't have a container for them to feel through them. And so we need the higher self and the divine, connection to deepen the work that we do with our fear and our lower self, issues. And so if we can awaken that, sense of presence in some way, again, first person, second person, or third person God, right? It's like sometimes it feels to me like what you're speaking of is the third person God, to trust that the universe ultimately is benign, and what is happening, whatever is actually, not, certainly not punishing us, not out to get us. It's kind of stretching us to make us grow, or it's, like taking us through something that we just have to go through to know an inner truth that we didn't know before. And so if we can, like surrender and relax as much as possible into the river of life that we're living, and know that it's actually safe, right? And it's taking us where we want to go.
Okay, well, that's the whole lecture for me. I'm with you. Let's hear what else is coming.
Okay, yeah. So, the inner will, would be that will that would sort of have that faith or that trust, and and sort of that sense of things. And again, it's something that grows on you. It's not like a blind faith, right? Through our experiences in life, through the journey that we've gone on, through the other times that we've been, in the rapids or in the squeezes or the passages, right? Like we're learning, and hopefully, we can look back on those times and see, that we needed them and that it gave us something, right? And so then we can kind of apply that to the difficulties of this moment. but it can be very challenging. And then, of course, the outer will gets involved and wants to, do something. Like, we have to do something. So to succeed, the outer will must be sustained at least to some extent by the inner will. And to the extent that the inner will functions, success will result. If the degree of inner willpower is small in relationship to the outer will, with all its conflicting currents, the desired result will not be realized. So, we have to realize that the guide has said this in other places, right? If we want something that is a legitimate desire, right? And he's saying that, lots of things are, very legitimate desires, that it's healthy for us to, want these things. And, yet oftentimes they're not in our lives, and where we want them and they're not, then we have to kind of excavate and look at the cross currents, right? Where is there some subpersonality in us, or some consciousness of, resistance, and often they carry good messages, like good things to check out, or, take on a little more consciously. So they're always useful to uncover and understand what the resistances are, or the, it might be misconceptions and images, or it might be like a real need, right, to become aware of. And, we're unconsciously, using our outer will and pushing away, and some parts saying, no, I don't want to do that because that's not the way I want to do it, right? I want to flow with it with my inner will. I don't want to just force anymore, right? So we have to listen to the resistances as well as and become more conscious of the no as well as the yes current in the will. And both are aspects of the will, right? No and yes. So, says the outer will is often motivated by immature feelings, desires, reactions, and reasonings, whereas the inner will comes entirely from the higher self. And he says here the inner will comes from the solar plexus, and it's an interesting, various systems have different ones. So, and when I feel into it, I feel something of that, right? But, I think there's also like will centers in all of the chakras in some ways. And some of the, the will center of the heart, the back of the heart chakra, which is my will to love, right? Or set, my yes to life in some way, comes, I think, in that way a little more. But also the life force, that says, I want to be here, right? And I'm, gonna take advantage of it as best I know how. So let's consider now why the inner will is kept from functioning. And this is where we really get into sort of the vicious circles and the dualities and the splits and stuff that are, kind of layered in here in the psyche oftentimes. So he says there's the inner will is kept from functioning. There's a prohibition that's caused by various layers of error, deviations from truth, and illusions that are prevalent in the manifest world. In short, the inner will is impeded because of the images, wrong conclusions, and misconceptions you carry in your conscious and unconscious mind. These always make you uncertain and divided within, because deep inside you know that something is wrong, and although you will feel it but vaguely, you know it is not in accord with truth and will not clear up unless you do the work of self-search and self-finding. And so this is, like he always says, right? We feel something off, and it's just an invitation for us to find the truth, right? To know the truth, that it's saying that there's an inner conflict inside of us, and we have to find our own inner authority about it. And in order to come to our own inner authority about it, we have to go in and listen to the arguments, listen to the conflict. Sometimes, especially if there's a criticism or a judgment involved, like it's like, well, let's have a trial, right? Let's have a prosecutor and a defense, right? Let's find the truth. And so we can, use that vague feeling, and we don't have to feel defeated by it or lost in it so much. And then he goes on and he says, and even if the desires are quite legitimate and healthy, that because of these programs, I think even, some of what we were talking about early on before we started the lecture, that we carry from our backgrounds, our religious upbringing, our families and all of that, right? They create these confusions, and so we're still uncertain about them. And he says this is not only because part of the motivation for the desired result might be immature and truly selfish. So we have to be willing to see, okay, where is their selfishness? And that may be where it overshadows the good and healthy motive. But it also can be because the unconscious deviations and misconceptions, apart from the desire itself, suffice to cover the inner will so that it cannot function. So it can be direct or indirect in its, inability to function. And it can, be caused by, images and confusions that we have in our soul that we came here to unravel.
A question.
Uh-huh.
Is it saying there that it's possible to do what the inner will really wants you to do, but using the outer will to do it, in a sense, and then does that negate the fact then that it really is a valuable to do? I don't know if I'm making any sense.
I'm not sure I'm following. I think what I'm hearing is like that there is a, like the true health, healthy will be a blending of outer and inner will, right? So your inner will, your outer will has to function sometimes to bring about something, right? But if your outer will is doing it from this place of, well, I should, rather than from the inner will that says, yes, I want to do this, right? Then it's going to be a slow slog, right? It's going to be suffering as you go forward.
Well, even if the inner will would ultimately say, that's what I should do.
Well, the inner will would never say that's what I should do.
No, okay. Well,
that's always the outer will that says that.
Okay, there's still some confusion. I'll stick with that question, see how it unfolds here.
Yeah, let me say, so again, the inner will is true desire, right? It's not what we should do, it's what we want. And, like sometimes we think we don't want something, right? And so we feel the resistance and we don't, and we feel like, oh, well, then I have to use my outer will and make myself do it because it's what I should do. But I would say that would not be the best way to go about it. The best way to go about it would be to recognize, okay, so I have an inner no, I have resistance to doing this thing that, if it's really the right thing for me to do, within me I can find my true desire to do it. And not try to, split myself and make some sort of moralizing, forcing current be the authority forcing me to do something, right? That's not free will. And the free will, okay, like, we, as our parents' age, sometimes, people, we have to take care of them or whatever, right? And so it's kind of like we can say, I have to, or we can recognize the place inside that, for various reasons, chooses to and wants to. And sort of by shifting that, kind of perspective, right? It's like, and holding the suffering of, it's truly a sacrifice, right? It's truly, not what you would, like, another part of you would desire, right? But so can you find a part that does desire it, right? Can you be at peace, and sort of in holding in compassion, the cost of it, the suffering of it, also feel, like maybe the blessing of doing it somehow within yourself. Right?
Speaking from my personal experience, I would say what it feels like is you lose your personal grounding in the needs of the person who needs the caretaking. And you don't feel like you're on your own path anymore. You feel like you're on their path. And their path feels like a ball of confusion. Speaking from my own personal
Right. No, I can, and I
predicament, But what I'm hearing in the lecture also is that the images undermine the true will. And perhaps the negative intention born out of the images, part of it too, the undermining process of the true intention of the inner will. The true intention of the inner will is to make peace with the world and be one with God.
Yeah, and I mean, like it was kind of right there what you were saying, Frank. Like when you were saying, like, okay, so my experience is that I can no longer follow my path. I have to be on their path, right? And so like that is a way of framing your experience, right? That the guide might say, like, well, I get that, but also like, why is this not your path? Like somehow you chose this mother, here's where you are and she is, and maybe there is some great purpose and gift for you in this, or in going through it, or deciding not to, or whatever happens, in the process, right? But that it is your path right now. And if we can, affirm in a way like, well, this is not what I would have chosen, but this must be my path since this is where I am.
Yeah, it's a path I don't want to accept.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is then that we can pay attention. So in the resistance to accepting it, right? There's a juice in that, right? Maybe, or some positive pieces, but there's also a cost. It also adds to the difficulty, perhaps, that's naturally there. Like there is a real difficulty, and it's got to be a trial and truly difficult and hard, right? But maybe if you supported and affirmed that work somehow for yourself, within yourself, you would find it easier somehow to swallow or be with or endure or whatever is needed, right?
Yeah. I will say that 4 days of intense work at Seven Oaks would feel like a vacation right now.
And they could use you, I'm sure. So, and you do. I mean, absolutely. I don't know if you have care, like people that come to give you breaks so you can.
Oh yeah. I have. I have a network set up. It's still my part of it. Just dealing with my part of it is what's difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it is. It's kind of like this deeper question of, okay, God, why am I here? Like it's time to have an argument with God, right? It's like, I don't want this, and like have a big fight with him, and see if you can get him to help you see why it's a good thing instead of a bad thing. And I know that's kind of metaphorical, right? But oftentimes when we can honestly go in and, talk to what we think, is making us have to be in this place, and speak our truth, that then we have a space where we can receive the higher understanding. So sometimes it's good to, I think in the Jewish tradition, it's kind of like they talk about this tradition of wrestling with God, right? We should never, just accept God's authority. We should always wrestle with God. Which means, wrestle with the way things are, but do it sincerely, not just rebelliously, right? Like do it from that place of, I want to know why I have to go through this or whatever.
Yeah, I'm trying to do it with some dignity, but sometimes I do lose it.
Yeah, no, and you're gonna. I mean, I watched. I mean, that's just normal, and so forgive that, and just do your best to keep opening your heart, and the heart can be opened a little better when we can feel our own compassion for our suffering and our willingness to carry this cross, right? It's a cross in a way to carry that, we have to say yes to. So let's see. Where did we leave off? So the healthier your psyche, the better your inner will can function. The unhealthy psyche is confused, not only about others and the world, but foremost about itself. Confusion creates doubt, impatience, anxiety, and tension. In addition to this chain reaction, we have other currents to consider. If doubt exists about a desire, it is accompanied by a feeling of guilt. Yet the desire may be doubly strong, due in part to the healthy and good motive, and partly to the unhealthy one. The latter always creates compulsion, right? So compulsion and addiction are big in our culture too, and so there's, like a lot of stuff that goes on with this dynamic. And then, with guilt and compulsion being two contrary directions that further afflict the inner will. So we might desire a certain result with all our might, but in a confused and divided state, the inner will cannot penetrate the unhealthy layers. So what you outwardly wish, we inwardly question. So, and I don't know if you've ever found that in yourself, like, where you maybe don't know if you deserve it, or you don't know if, it's selfish desire. He goes into that, here quite in depth, right? So see if you can tune in at one place later on. He talks about, like trying to do a little exercise with this. So see if you can tune in. What is your desire? What is your desire in, these moments? Maybe there's more than one. Maybe there's an impossible one. Whatever. But just kind of tune into. Just, is it okay to have a desire inside of you? Because the guide is saying, sometimes we prohibit even the thought or the possibility of a desire. And then, of course, we can't know what we want or who we are in some way. Right? And then sometimes we may have a desire, but we feel guilty about it, or we feel, like it's not allowed. So backing up again, he says, you may desire a certain result with all your might, but in a confused and divided state, your inner will cannot penetrate the unhealthy layers. What you outwardly wish, you inwardly question. Not only do you doubt that you can gain what you wish, but you also doubt the rightfulness, the justification of it. You have a vague, unconscious feeling that your possible selfishness will jeopardize obtaining what you want because you don't deserve it. Needless to say, these doubts are the gravest hindrance to the functioning of your inner willpower. So the more the inner will is hindered, the more then we try to make up for it by strengthening the outer will. So this whole culture is a culture on the outer will and discipline and working out and, eating right and, doing it all by the book, right? And it's all this outer will discipline stuff. And, for some people, they do it pretty well and it works and they somehow can do that. But there's a lot of the population that they can, their outer will doesn't function that well. And so then they end up, feeling even worse, and, they might be the people that, always feel like they're not good enough because they can't, put together all of this stuff. So he says the strength of the outer will is always unhealthy, right? It's like the outer will has a purpose and it has a function, but it shouldn't be that which is used to motivate us. And again, it's full of tension, anxiety, and impatience. Do you guys recognize this, like the pressure of the outer will inside of you?
Yes.
So since it cannot function, it brings frustration as well. And with that, a renewed doubt in yourself. And then the feelings of inadequacy and inferiority are thus fed anew. So there's a vicious circle here, right? And the outer will can be composed of healthy motives too. Then unhealthy motives such as self-importance, pride, vanity, or the will to rule, those can exist only in the outer and not in the inner will. The inner will is pure, healthy, and without doubt. It flows quietly. It knows. The outer will does not flow. It pushes and pulls in all directions. Seen from our vantage point, it is a harsh, uneven current, like a lightning flash, sometimes stronger or other times weakening. It is angular, pointed. It undulates in its direction and frequency. In contrast, the inner will maintain a slow and even flow, always rounded. So I have, like a good example, like when we were first kind of trying to go on the land and get some tasks done as a group and, decide what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, like I could feel in my, being like, and, we're about ready to do things, right? So the outer will is ready to go. But in the process of, making the decisions and sort of working together in harmony, the outer will getting in there sort of, you could feel that sort of harshness or that pushiness or that, pressure within it. And it was in me, and then it was coming out and other people were feeling it as well. And, so like you could feel the whole current of the group was getting affected by it. And we had to, process that in the moment and manage to do okay with it, given that it's a group of people that don't know Pathwork and don't know how to process these kinds of things. But, it's like it was very obvious, and for me, it became like, okay, so now my task, for right now in this configuration is really to like ground back down into my inner will and trust, right? Trust it's all happening. And there's been a few times when I've gotten, something's wrong, it's not happening right, but then I'll discover, oh, that was completely wrong. It's like my overreaction, my anxiety was not necessary because it may not have happened exactly how I was expecting it or thought it was supposed to, but it all happened. It all happened in divine order and everything worked well. And the more I can let go and stop trying to push the river, the better it is for me. So this is a very beautiful. I mean, a lot of people these days, are talking about this state of flow, right? I mean, this was back in the 1960s, but it's like it's much more common now, and lots of people talk about this state of flow as kind of a part of the state that we're trying to get to. And so this is one of the lectures that I think works with this. Helps us try to work with it. So he says, it is important for our happiness, right? That we, can see the healed soul and this sort of beautiful, slow and even flow, rounded, and so we have these unhealthy and erroneous attitudes and reactions that are kind of jangly, and so we're learning how to kind of relax and settle back down into this deeper flow and trust, things as they're unfolding. And he says it's important for our happiness. And though it's true that we can move mountains with strong enough willpower, if that will has to come from within, and that presupposes the existence of a healthy soul and of goodwill, right? It will prove most useful for you once again to make a list of your desires. So this is the exercise I was referring to, so it gives us here in the lecture. So I don't know if you have a list of your desires. You might tune in and see, do you have a list, or is there one important desire that you can think of right now? And then listen deep into yourself. And by finally tuning in to how your willpower feels around this desire, see if you can determine which will it is. Anybody have a sense?
I have a desire for peace in my heart and peace in my mind. And I believe it's an inner will desire.
Yeah, sounds like it. Good. Anyone else? So, the guy just goes on again to remind us, right? Like if it's the outer will, we'll have a feeling of doubt, maybe scruples or certain guilt or question as to whether or not we're entitled to it. Some of that I think had to happen, when I first found out about this land. There was a part of me that said, oh, I would like to do that. I hope I can do that, but I don't have a way to do that. I don't have the money to do that. Who am I to do that, right? And so, there was a process, I think, that unfolded over time, through various different things that, and the other part, I think that for me, it was never, sort of about me. It was always like I wanted to do this in service or for the earth or for others that I cared about, right? So for the youth, and so this issue of entitled to it became more secondary. I knew inside of me, this is a good thing to want, and God wants it too, I'm sure, sort of thing. and then it was trusting, and also amazing to see how in the function of the inner will, things are drawn together. I don't know if the land is drawing it, the people it needs, or, I'm doing it, or we're all doing it, or, but things are serendipitous. Things are, coming together, and, also things are challenging sometimes, but it's like you can kind of see the winds of spirit are in our sails and supporting us. And I think that's evidence of that inner will, right? And then that also helps us relax and not be so fearful or impatient, right? So there's a benign circle that begins to function. Your outer will can feel so impatient, so urgent, so tense that you're all tied up in knots. I've been there before. When you think of that particular desire. Behind the compulsion and urgency that appear on the surface, you are bound to find the same uncertainty and doubt. So see if you can connect with that. Whenever we're feeling compulsive, right? That there's some uncertainty and doubt underneath. Urgency. A person who's really struggling with, there's all of this, these employers complaining that they don't have anybody to work, and she's been, she's very qualified. She's been trying to find a job, and she can't get a job, and she's like, yeah, I gotta, she had a job for several years and kind of it completed, and so she thought it wouldn't be a difficulty. So there's something going on, right? With spirit in this, and it's a work that's bringing up, this insecure outer will, feeling frozen and, can't do anything, doesn't know what to do, want something to happen, can't stand to not know, it's all very intense. And yet sometimes life has to take us into those places, right? And out the other side, so that we can learn more and more to relax, because sometimes it's like that. We we don't have the next step coming up to meet us yet. And it takes a kind of breathing and patience and faith to hang out in that not knowing place and stay with that flow. So if you discover that your inner will functions in certain cases, you will feel very different. You will feel absolutely no qualms. You will feel a very calm serenity in your wish. You will also feel the certainty that you will get it. It may take time, but you will not be impatient, nor will you be resigned. You will be at one with yourself. In the inner will there is a pure strength, a strength that does not make you tense. This work is very important for you, my dear friends, as it is the only way to eliminate the levels of the outer will that hinder the functioning of the inner will. Even if both will currents pursue the same goal, even if the outer and inner will desire the same thing, the mere fact that the outer will is tense and impatient prohibits the inner will from unfolding, from floating, from affecting the cosmic forces. So here's where, in some ways, meditation, relaxation exercises, like all of these things where we can learn how to just be with what is. I love Adyashanti's meditation, allowing everything to be as it is. That's a great one for the, outer will to relax and accept and just be with, and let go. But sometimes, it's like we have to go in and again and work with the outer will and feel its fear. What does it need? What does it believe? Hold it, talk to it, re-educate it. It's, again, another form of the inner child, right? That is probably in some kind of pain body, altered consciousness. It's in a regressed state, acting through an old image, lost in an old pattern. And so, we want to try to wake up in the midst of that and bring this calm and this place of, connection to some sort of holding space, some sort of spiritual, flow or ground. And it helps to just learn to relax our bodies and be in the moment now, because usually in the moment now, like our fears and everything else is like in the mind, in the past and in the future, right? Or we're projecting, or we're ruminating over something in the past. And so here now is a good ground for us to come into and, notice that, it's okay. Right now, you can relax and just kind of try to help yourself. Try to help your little child inside who's tense and anxious. Say, it's okay, I'm here now. You can let go. This doesn't help, right? We can just relax. Nothing bad's going to happen right this moment. It's okay. And allow the body and the inner state to kind of let down and let go a little bit. And as we, can relax, relax. I have a hymn. It has that word. It's actually the Portuguese version of it, which is relaj, right? Relaj is like a good way to say relax. Relax is kind of the outer will. Relaj is the inner will, right? Relaj. Flow into, relaxed, peace, being here now. Let go. Notice any tension and just give it a kiss, give it a hug.
Arlene,
Uh-huh.
I'm hearing your words and they sound very nice, but not to put a fly on the oatmeal here, but some of my greatest wishes are for peace on the planet, and also environmentally, I've been working on for decades, and having the intention out there and actually thinking things were improving, and living now, in the West.
Oh yeah.
And for months at a time, it's really hard to. Things right now are not good. Even my voice, you can probably hear rasping in it just from being just a little bit outdoors today, and it's really difficult to just allow it to be as it is, and somehow trust, because it looks like it's definitely going the wrong direction, and I'm really experiencing it firsthand for weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
So
no, I
that's a tough
agree.
one.
I think this is another level, and so I think this is where we have to feel the grief. We have to accept the consequences, and somehow I think, there's one of the hymns in the Daime that says, in the firestorm there is the light, in the deluge there is the flow. In the infinite night there is the dreamer. It is into this that we have to let go. What can, even in this, what good is our worry, right? What good is our angst, right? Somehow we have to find a place of prayer and acceptance even of this, and maybe also action, I don't know, I don't know if I could stand to live in the West, and yet I would feel also guilty for not, being there as a witness, and so there's, again, it's interesting to me that we're all in a place, that we've been put in a place, and so part of our lesson and part of our, gift is to be there in that place in some ways. So maybe, in prayer and witnessing, and also in whatever action, of course, we can't give up now, right? And I think that we also have to realize that as slow and dull as we are, that the grassroots things are coming up from, and people are finding other solutions, and the biggest thing has to be, that we find love, that we can reorient around love, instead of the ego. And that may take, sort of going through these places of, the loss of what we've had to open the heart in some way. So there's a part of me that, completely can't stand, and I'm totally with you and would be in despair over there, and am even from here in many ways. I'm struggling. There's a lot of rain, and it's a hard rain, and it's disrupting the ecosystem of the creek, and, getting it all messed up. So, it's not nearly like a fire, the air being unbreathable, but, it's not easy, and yet somehow it's through this that we're going to have to go. You're right. It's like it's into, through, and out the other side of this now. And yeah, I don't know. Everything seems to be, compounding much faster, all of the projections and the hope that we would have some time, and the, vicious circles of the negative side of it are really coming in. So who knows where we're going? And again, all we can do is sort of trust that whatever our life will bring us to is what we were meant to go through and to learn from. And to, life is a sacrificial event, right? So the question is, not if you're going to sacrifice yourself, but what do you want to sacrifice yourself for, right?
Life is a sacrificial event.
Yeah.
I've never heard that quote.
Comes from Brian Swim, but it's true. I mean, if you think about it, right? I mean, you came here to die. Like you're using yourself up every moment of the day. You're giving yourself away. So the question is, and this is Native American understanding too. Like everybody has their place on the wheel of life by what they give away, right? So we came here to sacrifice ourselves for each other, for the world, for what matters to us, right?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'll have to get that, read Brian Swim or whoever you could quote me on or give me some information on. That's an interesting concept. I like that.
Yeah, it comes out of one of his Canticle to the Cosmos. He has a master's degree course that's on DVD that he did like many years ago, but it's still like really cool. It's a little outdated in the science, but I think it's still basically correct in the principles. And he has one of the sections is on destruction and loss as part of nature and part of the natural cycle of things, right? And that's when he talks about that there.
Yeah, no, I watched many of those too, but I don't remember that quote. But he may have said it. I didn't have the concept of it. So, yeah, thanks. That's an interesting way to hold it. You just clicked my brain on that one. So, thanks. Yeah.
I think it's very, it's helpful myself. So let's see. So he goes in here now a little bit with some of our image stuff, and he wants to discuss one of the mass misconceptions that affects practically everybody to some degree. And it's a strong factor in prohibiting the inner will from functioning. So he says, I'm speaking about your concepts of selfishness and unselfishness. People very frequently think, and if they do not do so consciously, they feel it unconsciously, that whatever brings them happiness must be damaging to someone else. Hence, it is inevitable that your conscience bothers you every time you are happy, whether you are actually selfish or not. This guilt is bound to afflict your inner will for happiness. So does anybody recognize this, like that there's a kind of inner sense that, like if I want something, often we are taught this as children, like we're being selfish and selfishness is bad. And, so if we want something, which we do as children, we want things and we think they're going to make us happy, but then, we're told that that's selfish. And so we have like this deep suppressed, desire to be selfish because we just think that that's how we can finally find happiness, but it's not allowed, right? And we have guilt if we even think that we want something for ourselves.
Well, I might have a little of that on a grander scale, thinking like maybe I'm going to want to move up to the Northwest and on the coast and get out of the smoke. And it's like, oh, well, how can I'm leaving all this behind? There's a selfishness there that I deal with. Yeah, interesting.
I don't know if you're gonna have to move up to Canada too. I don't know if you can get out of the smoke up there or not.
Yeah, I would love to move up to Canada. Up in.
But yeah, it's a good example. So like this is, like as you think of yourself, it is this. So there's an inner split or conflict, right? And so you need to go inside and you need to find out, what's true. The guide is always asking us to ask what is true. And is it really true that if you run from the terrible smoke that you're being selfish, or, if you don't stay and witness that you're abandoning your post somehow, right? Something that you'll have to answer inside of your own being, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. It's well, I've been wanting you up there for years, even before this, but maybe that's justifying it. So anyway, well, thanks. Good points.
and so, we have this unconscious concept that is that if you enjoy something, your pleasure will be at the expense of somebody else. And the guide is saying no, like, the ultimate truth of the universe is, like what's good for, like what's truly good for the one is good for the whole. If we are in joy and in fullness and in pleasure, right, that is what we can share and give and pass on to other people, right? It's not a selfish thing to, want our fullness, want to be all who we can be, and want to take care of ourselves, have our boundaries, etc.
So I guess I kind of relate to what you were talking about with the land, of feeling like, who are you to have that? Or maybe there's like a mix of inner and outer will, because I've been like trying to write down, what my desires are, like manifestations type of things, but seeing if they line up with, me authentically. And I feel like there's some that I have a hard time knowing if it's like external will or internal will or a mix. And it gives me doubt. It makes me like, I don't know, I always tend to judge myself and think that I'm doing it for superficial reasons, but they're truly wants, and then trying to find that the truth within it that's aligning with like the greater good is sometimes very confusing.
So good, yeah. And so, this is, I think, what he's talking about here, to some degree. And there's this programming, right? And so, like, you have to basically, everything that you want, if it's not a free, clear, flowing yes, right, then you have to break it down. You have to go in and do a lot of inner, self-searching, like, and listen to the different voices. So, the voice that you feel like, is holding back and saying, like you don't deserve, or it's not allowed or something, bring it out. Who are you? What do you really believe, right? It's like it's a part of our consciousness that's, locked in some image, right? And maybe it's true, so like you want to know what it really believes, and then you want to go inside and say, well, is that the truth? Is that what I really believe, right? And sometimes, and he talks about this here too, there's like truth and distortion on both sides, right? So you have to sort of begin to unravel it all. And this is the process of coming to your own inner authority about everything inside of you that is split. Basically, you have to reunify by knowing, the split, and then discovering what the truth is. So it is the work in some way, right? So sometimes there's, different ways of accessing, these feelings, and most often what happens is that we recognize, oh, we have this, confusion or this conflict, and then we just kind of feel lost in that, right? And it's almost like we're spellbound. Oh, I'm in conflict, and I've tried to figure this out 1,000 times, or I keep just bouncing back and forth. But that's because we're not conscious enough. Enough consciousness hasn't come to bear on the question. And so this is where, like I like to say sometimes, oh, we need to have a court. We need to hold a trial. We need to, have a prosecutor and a defense. We need to hear all of the sides of the, confusion and the conflict. Entertain a medicine wheel, counsel wheel, right? And maybe journal all the different voices that are sitting around this particular issue. So does that seem like that would be useful for you? If you could, do you have a sense of how you could do that and apply that?
I think so. I
Do you
think it
want to,
would just depend on each one.
yeah, you want to use it, you want to just go in with an example for a minute and try it on for size.
I think for me, the idea of being in a relationship is constantly I don't know if there's a full internal yes. There seems like there's an underlying no. I like to think that I want to be in a long-term committed relationship, and I've been in one for 4 years, but there's like a war always a little bit with it, and I'm in constant, like, it's like there's an impatience, as if there's somewhere that I have to get to within the relationship. And I think that the truth is, a relationship is like a living, evolving thing, and there feels like I'm not going to be at peace or committed or without fear until something happens. You know what I mean? I don't know what that something
Gotcha.
is.
Yeah, good. So so then as you're, hearing that, voice inside of you, right? And it's a strong one and it's kind of running things a little bit, but now as you're speaking it, can you, get a little distance from it? Can you be curious about it? Like, maybe that's like a an experience from this, pain state or pain body state, right? Maybe it's an image, that's going on that says, oh, I have to get somewhere, or I have to be safe and I'm not safe yet, and until I get him to be a certain way, I can't be, like whatever that is, right? So those are like the voices of the defense, right? The emotional part that's wanting to either run or fight because it doesn't believe it's okay or it's safe or it's, got what it needs, right?
Yeah, I think what's making me curious is that a lot of the things that I used to say I needed have come to fruition, and there's still this restlessness. And I'm like,
Exactly. Good.
okay, so if
Yeah.
all of these things have come to fruition, I'm running out of like reasons, and I still feel, you know,
So it's not
no.
real, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's a projection. It's not real. It's an old pain body that's, like needs to be re-educated, healed, right? You don't need to buy that anymore. But because the feeling is still alive inside of you, there's a process that can help you with that, right? But to the extent that you can see right now and can remember, try to wake up each time, it comes in, this, whatever this is, it's not going to be happy no matter what. This is something inside of me, and it thinks it needs something outside of itself, but it probably needs something from me. So maybe I need to look inside and see what the heck it's trying to what it needs, and see if I can give it to it. Or try to understand more fully, like, well, what is the fear, right? Can you die? Can you face the fear? The guide has another lecture on the abyss of illusion, right? That we have to jump into the abyss, right? And that's what this is, like as the avoidance of the abyss. What the abyss is not real. It feels real. Emotionally, it feels very real. And so we have to kind of go towards it instead of keep trying to buy the voice that says, it's time to go.
Yeah, that resonates.
For me, sometimes it feels like I can't live up to my partner's, I'll never be able to live up to my partner's expectations. So it's not so much what I'm trying to get from the other person. It's what I don't think I'm able to give.
Right. Right. So the inadequacy, but again, it's like, is that true?
Right. Yeah. No.
And there may even be, and there may be something else that it's trying to say in that, maybe it's like, do I want to really live up to all my partner's expectations, or,
Right.
or, maybe it wants to just be me, or whatever, so.
Yeah. I mean, I have guilt when I'm like, go back to my little sanctuary, and I'm like, I disconnect for 2 or 3 days, barely communicate with Mary. I have guilt when I do that, but I know I need to do that for myself. She even knows I need to do that for myself, but I still have guilt when I do that.
And it's like a vicious circle, and then you can't really receive what you're giving to yourself, and again, there's
That right there. You can't even receive what you're giving to yourself. That was perfect, darling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a way in which like probably your feeling of pressure towards yourself, feeling like you somehow should live up to her expectations, right, is why you feel so demoralized and so like like, okay, now I got to go run away. It's not about her at all. It's so if you didn't pressure your own self, you might even not have to have so much downtime away from her, right? So that's like, so how the vicious circle kind of just keeps tightening the noose, and then if you can reverse it, then it can actually it's its own cause in some way, right? So the feeling of pressure is in the belief that somehow she expects you and you're falling below that expectation. And
you know what? She doesn't even voice much expectation.
Exactly. Who is that
like,
expectation? It's all yours. It's all in your own head, right?
Exactly.
Get off your own back. Right?
Exactly.
No, I think that resonates, Frank, as you were talking about that. I'm thinking like, I keep making excuses externally, but I think the fear is probably internal,
Yeah.
what you're saying makes sense. Look inward.
I could really relate to what you were talking about, Dominique. This part kind of feeling like, is this what I want, or is this what I wanted, or is this what relationships are about? And now that I have it, like there's kind of like a wondering and a striving and kind of a sense of not enoughness, and sometimes the blame I find myself towards my partner, for the not enoughness. But later I catch myself seeing that it's me, I'm not feeling complete, or I'm not receiving some kind of picture that I thought I ought to have in a relationship, right? Some kind of idealized partner image.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do struggle with that sometimes, even if we just take my current partner out of the picture, I got to this partner because something didn't feel right about other partners before, right? So in some ways, I made some choices that I felt at the time I was changing and I was transitioning, and the partners I was with didn't really kind of meet that deeper need. There was a lot of codependency, I think partially in me because I was kind of distant, and then they were, it met the clingy, dependent part in them. But yeah, so I have a little bit of uncertainty still about what some of these messages are about, which part of me they're coming from, whether it's from the more projecty part that says this is how it ought to be, and it will be easier if you're alone, or there's somebody else better out there kind of thing. So kind of more of a fantasy kind of part, or sometimes if it's sensing that something isn't right and getting into a relationship for false reasons and not being able to work through certain things. I'm not necessarily saying that that's exactly what's going on right now, but sometimes I wonder which part of me is talking, right?
No, that is it right there. Intuition versus fear.
Right.
How to and I guess that's inner versus outer will in some way.
Right.
Yeah, and it's always good to question the voice of fear. Right? It doesn't mean that there's not ultimate, there might, every voice can have a piece of truth and a piece of, distortion, right? So it's like you don't have to, it's kind of like going in any voice that you hear and sort of opening yourself up and, okay, so what's its truth, but where is it? If it's scaring me, there's something off. If it's causing some kind of, fear, shame, pride, self-will kind of reaction, there's got to be a lie in there. There's got to be a falseness in there, an old belief that's no longer real or something like that. And so, if you can, go in and really seek, take the full responsibility. Like if I'm in negativity, if I'm in, run mode or defense mode in some way, it's really for me to see that and understand it's not necessary. And if I'm unhappy, it's probably because I'm trying to defend, right? It's like I'm not being real. I'm not, I'm in a, false life in some way, living out of the idealized self-image or this alienated self, right? Instead of the real self. And so, it's good that you're questioning and seeing that, right? It just has to be that, like the mind kind of looks at it and wonders, right? And that's good, but don't get rhetorical, actually go in, because the answer is inside of you. Go find it. Answer the question. What is this really? What is inside of me? What does it believe? What do I feel, We're coming into the fall. It's time for introspection, right? Okay. Good discussion, everybody. And these things about, like the wanting, it's a good common one, like I want a relationship, but then every relationship I'm in, it's like, it's like there's always this, issue or fear or inability to trust it or settle down into it or, receive it fully and give to it fully, right? Which is what we ultimately want to do. And believe me, it's your birthright. It's what it's what you came here to get, is that kind of relationship. And believe me, it's not about that you've got the wrong partner. Right? That relationship is possible with the partner you have right now.
Say more.
Even when your partner's path doesn't really actually line up with yours?
I think so. It's like my partner is not at all into any of my
I know that. Yeah. So you're speaking from firsthand experience.
Yeah, and it's a great relationship. But the difference is, like, okay, so I accepted him as he was, and I love him for who he is, and I don't try to make him different. And he was self-responsible enough, even never having done the path work, that he could, take his own self-responsibility and offer me the same. And so we don't have to control each other. We can just love each other. It's great. And, in the beginning I used to feel, does he need me to be more attentive to him or something like that, but, he was always really good about letting me, wanting me to be who I wanted to be and who I was, right, So, I think when two partners, can, really give each other, that kind of freedom and instead of trying, where we get into trouble, the guide always says is, like we try to get our unmet childhood needs met by the partner, right? And then we're in a tug of war, this relationship is supposed to give me something, right? You're supposed to take care of me. You're supposed to do this. And that's, the guide says the real adult need is to give, not to get. So maybe next time we will look at that lecture. I don't know if we have before. It's on the real and false needs. I can't remember if we've done it, but it might be good to do it again.
There's another one on relationships that sound so different from what you just described. I think it's maybe 197 or 207, something like that. And their description of a relationship about the intimacy of both partners getting deeper and deeper and deeper is what I want. but that doesn't sound like what you have. So
Oh no, we have a great deal of intimacy. You know, that comes from just being real and sharing yourself, right? The guide says, you know, eros comes from the adventure of exploring, you know, who the other person is, you know, and he says, well, the other person is a vast soul that you can never know completely, you know, so you're never going to run out of material. And then he says, you know, what it takes is you have to be willing to reveal, and the other person has to be willing to reveal themselves, right?
and if the other person isn't,
You know, yeah, I mean, if the other person isn't, then yeah, maybe there's some, you know, way you could look inside, you know, and see if you're, you know, inviting that, and you're also revealing yourself, you know, and then you have to decide, well, you know, can I see the beauty in that soul? Can I discover that soul without them revealing themselves in some particular way that I think is necessary, right? You know, it's like, I mean, Ray doesn't always, I mean, we don't get into deep spiritual conversations necessarily, you know, but every time he wants to share something with me, you know, it's beautiful to hear and to receive, right? And you know, and I feel totally free to share with him whatever is true for me, right? And so there is, you know, it's not a clingy intimacy or a like constant, you know, we have to constantly be, you know, in each other's heads or anything like that. I think that can be a distortion too.
That might be my distortion, because there's a part of me that really craves that, and I've wondered, you know, how much of that has to do with childhood and not having any siblings and feeling kind of like my parents didn't quite understand me or I didn't understand them, and there's always this deeper craving for kind of a soul emotional understanding, not just me being understood. You know, I also wanted to be in closeness with another. So
Right.
whenever that's lacking, or I imagine it be lacking, or I notice that my partner is maybe wearing a mask, or is defensive in some ways, I find that a part of me says, well, shit, you know, I can't have it right now. And that's like the thing that I want the most in relating and being intimate and being with another person.
And you know
Yeah, it
how you
feels
get that is just,
unnutritious.
yeah, you know, so that's like a benign circle that can grow, you know, like, and it usually gets blocked because we get critical, right? You know, so like if you accept, so now she's in her defense. So if you can let her be in her defense, you know, then, and not be critical of that, you know, then later on she can feel free to share about it or something, right? You know, it's like,
Right.
oftentimes it's where, you know, we get into our judgment and don't accept the other person where they are. And again, you know, we're in that tug of war. We want them to do something different or change, you know. So it seems to me in general, even if, you know, like you're saying, Dick, you know, that, you know, this person maybe is less disclosing than, you know, you would like, you know, for you to be open and disclosing, and then to accept her in as much as she does disclose, and reward her more when she, you know, whatever, you know, it's kind of like when we can just appreciate each other as we are, that creates, I think, a space in which even wounded, you know, people can begin to come out. And of course, she doesn't know how, you know, her stuff is probably coming from her program, right? Not really about you, right? She's
right.
got programs about that. So you want to, you know, just invite her and make it safe when she does. And that will allow it to grow. You know, if
I
you
think-
invite her, but then, you know, it's not safe when she does, you get into an argument about something, or, you know, you have a desire then to control what she's bringing, then, you know, it can push it back.
Work.
I hear you, and at a certain point, you know, thinking back to some of my other relationships, I'm not saying I'm trying to do this now, but the counter argument comes up is that, what if you are waiting for something, you know, with this hope and this wishful thinking mind, like, well, if I just keep being open, I keep being, loving, etc., the person will finally come around, and it doesn't happen. And maybe 20 years down the road, and I'm like, well, shit,
Yeah.
Uh,
So and
so being
again,
passive in a way.
right, right. So, but see again, like you're in the child mind trying to get in the relationship, not to give.
Yeah, I want to relate, but I want to relate mutually. It's not
Yeah,
that I'm just
and
trying
and
to
and
take.
and,
I
and
just want it to
so
be mutual.
like if the guide says, all we can do is be fully responsible for our own self. So like if you give your mutuality and you give your heart and you give your acceptance and it doesn't, come back, then yeah, probably you need to, leave and wander on, but so much of what we get in relationship is mirroring our own stuff back to us, right? We have to realize that that person will be a totally different person, if we're a totally different person, right? Like there's just a way that it's always, so we might, think we really want something more, I mean, there was a time in my relationship, in the beginnings, where we were kind of in the tug of war and there was some things that I had to realize, okay, this is not, I'm probably not going to have this part of a relationship, so is this guy worth it, without that, right? Like he's not going to be everything for me, right? I'm going to have to find other people to fill in other things, and that's important for a relationship anyway. You should never have the relationship fulfill all of the needs, right? So and maybe it's such an intimate place and the person is totally not there, then yeah, you would have to, you would know that if you've done the work and you're really clear, then you could move on freely and you would have a deep wisdom about it, right? When before we do that, then the work is still ongoing, right? We haven't unraveled it and we're still in inner conflict and can't tell what's us and what's them, or and our fears are still speaking, right? And so there might be a way to explore this inner fear inside of you a little, that you might not get this thing, what is it, this intimacy, this
I think,
mutuality that you long for.
Jacob, I relate to the sense of like, but what if I do this and then I've wasted all these extra years again? You know what I mean? Like I've been in long-term relationships and then it's like, I think that's the part where I'm saying like, I don't feel fully committed. I still have a part of me that's like, I'm hoping for something more. And until I know I can get that, I can't commit. But then there is like a catch-22 of until I commit, I probably won't have that vulnerability back from my partner because I'm not being vulnerable to a certain extent. And Darlene and I have worked on this in helper sessions. And what's happened recently is like I found that my inner child didn't feel seen by my parents. I just wasn't seen. And so I want to be seen by my partners. And so the thing that happens to me is I also have this, I wish I could be in their head and they could be in my head and we could have this like enmeshment, I realize. And so working a little bit on my wounding, the childhood wounding in my meditations and in helper sessions has taken some of that fear away. And it actually has changed a lot of the interactions with my partner. As I'm saying earlier, these things I wanted are coming to fruition. And I'm still having this thing happen. This voice, and it has been from like stopping trying to control him and get from him, and now I see like how much more open he is and how much better our relationship is getting, but it has not taken away this wondering and like worry. And so that's why I'm like, okay, I guess I need to hold this court because it's obviously not external.
Yeah, we need to go in and see who this part of you, she's still a traumatized part, right?
Yeah.
Somehow there's trauma there that, and so she needs some help. She's not bad or we don't need to judge her. She just can't do it by herself, right? So so you have to go in and try to understand, and help guide her because, it's like she's still trapped in this hell realm of not being seen, and like you said, it's maybe happening and she doesn't even recognize it. So we have to kind of go in and show it to her, remind her and be there for her and say, even if he never sees you, I see you, or whatever like that, right? But yeah, good, all of it, excellent, and right on, you guys are getting this, and
Yeah.
I'd also like to say, sorry, Frank.
Go ahead. No, you go to.
I also wanted to say that this idea that we've wasted all these years in a
Good
relationship,
one.
right? Like we're living these years anyway, and if this is where we're learning, then it's exactly where we should be, and we're not wasting anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Thanks.
again, the image, oh, this is what relationship should be, or I should have and I mean, I don't know. I mean, it was the old, way that you would have, one, but, it's always changing. Like it's only in our generations that you had a partner that you chose based on love or compatibility or attraction. It's like before then it was, economical, or it was all kinds of other things that we would be in relationship with. So it's like, and there is always in the relationship, it's that path within the path, because unconsciously the child is going to, he absolutely will try to make the partner a parent and try to resolve the unconscious childhood wound through the partner parent. And so to be conscious that that's happening and take responsibility for your own child rather than try to get your partner to do it is a good practice.
It's sort of what I was going to say, that Dominique, that it's not all of your personality that's in doubt. It's just a part of it that's in doubt. And I'm pretty sure Darlene can help you isolate which part is in doubt and understand why.
And then we kind of have to hold his hand and say, even though you're scared, I think this is something to trust. Let's just hang out and see what happens, right? It's like, we risk life and say yes, even though we don't know for sure, right?
Ha, leap of faith.
Exactly. So let's see if we can, it's almost, let's see if we can finish the lecture. It's not, there's a Q&A, so we probably won't get to that, but maybe we can complete a little more of this. But good discussion, everybody. So I'm going to go back up a little way. So it's talking about the desire, since desires aim for happiness and wanting happiness is selfish. Like we think we must suppress all desires. I think I must have scrolled further than I thought. I don't know. Maybe. Did we read this before? You do not realize that as they are driven out, they continue their existence underground. So the really selfish desires in your unconscious make you feel guilty, but so also do the rightful desires. Both continue to claim and clamor inside of you, often without your awareness. And on top of this, the prohibition you inflict on them makes you resentful. You resent the world for not allowing you to be happy, while in reality it is your wrong conclusion about happiness that is the cause. In the process of suppression of all desires and impulses, the childish and therefore actually selfish ones cannot mature and redefine themselves. This can happen only if they are faced and dealt with in awareness. As a consequence, your legitimate and healthy desires and impulses, which are not selfish in the least, cannot find fulfillment. You are all weighed down by the unconscious conclusion that something is selfish merely because it makes you happy. This is tragic, my friends. You dare not wish for happiness simply because you fail to discriminate between actual and imagined selfishness. So again, if we have this feeling that we might be doing something selfish, go in and find the truth. What is this feeling? What do I want? Is it really selfish? Go in and do the study. And every time a rightful and healthy impulse for self-expression manifests, you think and feel and think of it as if it were you're really immature and crude selfishness. So we learn to kind of distinguish between those parts of us, right? The question now is how to treat the real selfishness that exists in the immature part of every human being. The usual and wrong way to handle this is to suppress it and superimpose a compulsive unselfishness that is not genuine. Out of the superimposition stems the unconscious concept that it would actually be very pleasant to be allowed to be selfish. This notion gets a foothold within you, and you unconsciously believe that to be selfish would bring you happiness. But you can't allow yourself to be happy, to be selfish, so, there's, see, you can see how complex and confusing this gets, right? Are you following this at all? I mean, sometimes we see these parts clearly in us and not always, but if we can follow the logic, we can imagine that it's possible, right? And you wrongly think that you should give in to your desire for happiness, that you would not be loved or approved of. So, then happiness becomes approval, right? And so since love and approval are so necessary for you, you would rather forsake happiness. And then the inner conflict can be stated in this way. If I could be selfish, I could do anything I wanted. That would mean happiness. On the other hand, I cannot be happy if I am not loved and approved of. Therefore, I must become unhappy in order to be happy. This sounds completely illogical, but the immature consciousness is this illogical and this contradictory. So is that making sense? And I venture to say that this conflict exists to some extent in all human beings. This wrong conclusion accounts for the utter hopelessness that you so often feel, a hopelessness that finds an outlet in occasional moods for which you find outer reasons and rationalizations. This conflict is the underlying reality of your hopelessness. Were your misconception true, happiness would indeed be an impossibility. You would be justified in being hopeless if you couldn't be happy without being loved, and you cannot be loved when you are happy. For happiness is selfish, according to this erroneous concept. There is unhappiness either way, and so this is always a way that we know that we're in an image, is like we're sort of damned if we do, damned if we don't, right? There's no real answer, and we usually settle for the least unhappy or the least worst result, right? And so that's a part of that abyss of illusion, is we should probably choose the other side and take this most unhappy path and see what really happens. Challenge the image, right? Challenge the fear of it. Challenge the belief that it will lead to our end, and maybe when we jump off that cliff, it becomes the shaman's death, the thing that feels like, oh, for sure we're going to die, but instead something else happens and we, grow, we expand, we fly. So you may fluctuate between two alternatives, but whichever way you turn, you find yourself unhappy and frustrated. You often rebel inwardly and try to force the people around you to break this law, or what seems to you a law. But your conviction that you are in an insoluble situation causes you to try to get out of it in the wrong way. The irony is that you try to come out of it by sometimes actually acting out your most childish and selfish impulses, rather than your legitimate and healthy ones. This must offend and provoke others. They react negatively towards you, and this in turn convinces you anew that your predicament is indeed hopeless. Only by a growing awareness and conscious discrimination can you be in a position to make the proper choices and so receive the proof that your conclusion was wrong. It becomes self-evident that this conflict frustrates your inner will and prohibits the deserved fulfillment of your desire. The idea that selfishness, if allowed, would be a happier state may be only in your unconscious mind, while consciously you know all the right answers. In that case, questioning yourself in the proper way will bring you closer to the inner contradiction. By going deeply enough, your answers will be less and less convincing even to yourself. When this happens, you are approaching the afflicted area. Some of you, if you took the trouble to think about it, might even find a consciously held belief that you would be happier if you were allowed to be selfish. Whether this misconception exists in your conscious or your unconscious mind, how can you be freely unselfish in your actions day in and day out? Not doing the unselfish act makes you feel guilty. Doing it seems to be a violation of your will and conviction. If it cannot be a free act independently chosen, whenever you do something out of compulsion and not because you say yes to it, you cannot be at one with yourself. So this is the suffering that, Frank, I think you were talking about a little earlier, right? And again, it's hard to say yes, and yet that can help us, if some part of you is saying yes, and probably that inner will that is choosing for deeper reasons, right, than just mere convenience and comfort or, your own selfish pleasures, but, it still is real, and so you have to see if you can, really find the place in you that can unify within you, and actually choose and help the child in you find a way to reconcile and feel a little better, like, make sure that it has playtime or it can, you get, like you said, the system, and notice what is it that triggers you the most, what is it, because that can be sort of your learning curve or some area that can be useful, and so instead of just having to sort of stay stuck in it and deal with it but not, have it useful in any way, this could maybe make it useful. So
Yeah. I think on the surface, it feels like the child inside of me doesn't want to take care of the parent that wounded him the most.
yeah, of course.
But, my adult self, my higher self, at this point in the stage of my path work, understands that what's going on and for some reason can't seem to make the shift. It's like the wounded child is still pissed off at the parent that wounded him the most and won't have the patience to deal with this parent who is so far off the path that, it's like, why do I have to take care of somebody who's so far off the path?
So ask God, call out to that.
Why is my
that's
path
a good
being
question.
sacrificed for this person who is so far off the path? That's what.
And your child needs a legitimate answer.
Yeah.
So you need to try to, you need to ask God or, call light and see what spirit can answer to that,
Yes. And it's, the answer is not obvious. It's not, not immediately obvious.
Right.
At the moment. Probably because I'm reacting more than anything at the moment.
In some ways the child is, not fully asking, right? It's like it's just throwing a tantrum, right? I don't want is what it's saying, right?
Yeah.
And of course. And so, and again, you can't judge it or push it away or force it, to not have a tantrum. You just want to hold it and let it be in its tantrum and then see if you can, call light and speak. Like, it needs to be re-educated. That something bigger is going on. It sees it only as, well, why do I have to, take care of this person that's not worth it, or whatever.
Well, I mean, if I can't do this, how can I ever achieve a state of unconditional love for anyone?
Right.
Right? I mean,
and so maybe a part of it is, that you really do see that the goal and the longing, your desire would be to have unconditional love for your mother. But the child is not there yet, right? And so then you have to kind of know that that's already in you, and you are now working to kind of help the pain body of the child transform out of that pain, right? So it's not like you have to force the child, to feel unconditional love, but you can let this knowledge that you already have unconditional love inside of you for your mother, and that's why you're there, and the child is still needing to somehow discharge something or find truth about something or go deeper in some way, right? And you're there to help that child find truth.
Like I said before, it's not all of me that's in revolt. It's just part of me. Yeah.
Exactly. And the part
That's exactly what you just told me, Frank.
I know.
Exactly.
I know, because I know it. I feel it. What's going on in my life? You know.
But can the part of you that is not in revolt hold and re-educate the part that is?
Yeah. Well, that is the practice. That is the path work.
Yeah. And it is a kind of active process, right? You know, you literally have to go in and talk to that child and hear its complaint and, you know, try to help it resolve itself, right? Without rejecting or denying it or, you know, but helping lead it to truth, to a deeper understanding somehow.
Yeah. The child keeps fluctuating between sadness and anger. There's a lot of sadness in this situation.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I don't want to see my mother in this condition, you know?
For sure.
And then there's the anger of like having to take care of her in this condition. And it's like, now I need to cover up the anger with something else. And that's usually impatience, because impatience is a little bit more acceptable than anger itself,
Right.
you know?
Yep.
So
and sometimes, I mean, I know there was a challenge that I had, you know, to shift some energy around a certain circumstance that I thought I was supposed to be doing and I never did, you know, but it kind of like it passed, right? You know, and I trust that somehow just being, you know, faced with it and consciously doing the best I could to work it, you know, was enough, right? You know, or like, you know, so it may be that, you know, your mother will die before your child finally
before my child works it out, right? Yeah, I know that. Thought about that.
Yeah. So, but
at least I'm trying.
Right, exactly. You're there. You're in the fray of it. You're in the process of it, right? In the washing machine.
Yeah, I'm in that washing machine. About time to add the bleach.
So let's see. Where are we? Are we almost done with this lecture? I think not. So I think we had a good discussion and we're getting close to the end. So let me see if I can find a closing place here to conclude in it. Sometimes he summarizes a little bit at the end. So let's see if we can find. Now let me just start here and we'll read to the end. He says, I said before that performing an unselfish act for a reward turns the act into a selfish one, you know. So this is sort of the love mask or the, you know, sort of. And so basically he's talking about, you know, like there is a sacrificial part of life, you know, that we can just give of ourselves, right? And this is where a deeper pleasure and fulfillment actually comes, you know. So he's talking a little bit about how, you know, our belief that if only we could be selfish, we would finally be happy. But true happiness really comes from the giveaway, you know, from that sacrifice, from that finding our gift and sharing it and caring, you know, more about another than for ourselves in some way, right? You know, or something, you know, like that we can give to. And so that's where ultimately the real happiness can manifest. He says, however, if you do the right thing in the right and mature way without ulterior motive and out of free choice, you will reap a reward of another sort, namely the good feeling of being at one with yourself, the security that only self-respect can offer. To do something wholeheartedly gives added self-respect that is a decided advantage manifesting in many ways. It will give you, among other things, the strength to overcome many weaknesses for which you may despise yourself. It will reduce certain fears and anxieties, especially when dealing with other people. Your fear of others is always based on your feeling weak and inadequate. By coming to terms with your confusions, by making independent decisions for carrying out unselfish acts, thus being at one with yourself, you gain the self-respect which reduces the very inadequacy and self-contempt that made you weak and fearful toward others. I cannot emphasize strongly enough that it is all important whether or not you act unselfishly because you truly want to or because you think you have to. As long as the conviction that makes you want to is lacking, you have to continue the work of self-search, of examining your motives and concepts in comparison with objective truth until you arrive at the point of conviction. Only then are you capable of making a free choice that is not driven by compulsion. This in turn will show you that unselfishness is not a yoke that you have to take on against your inner conviction. Instead, you will see without a doubt that unselfishness is really selfish in a healthy sense, and that it is to your advantage, provided your motives are right and your decision free, your reactions mature. This will free you of the misconception that selfishness could make you happy if you were allowed to indulge it. The other misconception that happiness is selfish and is therefore forbidden exists because of this misconception. So, try all of you to recognize your will, where it comes from, how it feels. If and when you find the inner will blocked, examine where and why you have doubts about the rightfulness of your desire. At times, this suspicion may be justified because your desire may actually be harmful to others or to yourself. At times, your desire may be justified, but many unconscious unhealthy motives may exist together with the healthy ones. At times, a wish may be wholly right and good, but your misconceptions about selfishness as well as in other areas may prohibit the inner will to function. Tonight I was focusing on a problem that is crucial and widespread. We will probably have to work on this subject with each of you individually. Prepare yourself by thinking about it, by feeling how these words apply to you. And then he goes into a Q&A, which may be good, but we don't have time to continue on. So if you want to take a crack at it later. But thank you, everybody, for a good discussion. And, hopefully it was useful and the lecture made some, brought some clarity in to this subject. Any last words, anybody?
Just a big thank you.
Yes, huge thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Darlene. And maybe
Okay.
this group could do one of the good relationship lectures coming up.
Yeah. And, try, I don't know if you want to give Amy Felcheck. I've heard good things about her lectures and stuff, so I think I sent that link in this one, if you want to tune in. It's on a Thursday night, I think in a couple of weeks or something that she's offering 81, so. Okay, we'll see you in 2 then.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Hey, y'all.
Thanks again. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Night all.